Good afternoon, all. We're getting close. We'll start the meeting in probably about 2 or 3 minutes.
What's that?
Like a dog.
Slurp, slurp, slurp. Sounds like my plumbing problem.
It's my dog. Sorry about that.
Hopefully that was a bowl, not the toilet or something like that.
Yeah, it was a ball, fortunately.
It is the appointed hour of 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining in or Zooming in. Special welcome to the media. Glad you all are able to join us. And as we get started, I want to first start by saying thank you to staff for the blood, sweat, and tears going into creating the budget scenarios. And thank you for all your thoughtful work. Our mission this evening is to review staff's recommendations, to discuss our priorities, and to reach a consensus to consider for adoption of a budget on Thursday. As talking with several folks in normal years of the budget, we know, for instance, we may be staring down a hole of $500,000, so we go and embrace that hole of $500,000. And sometimes we end up in a better situation. With this, we have no idea what 2021 will bring. And so again, very appreciative to council members taking the time to read through the budget, to think through scenarios and make recommendations and give us what we're working with this evening. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim for your remarks and guidance through the documents.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I also want to say thank you to Jake Adams, Gary Swink, and the leadership team who have done the majority of the heavy lifting as we've continued to review the budget and the changes that we see in the environment around us and the information that we are provided with. Jake is going to lead us through the changes in the budget, the updates that we've made, the revisions, etc. But first, I wanted Janie to put something up on the screen, Mr. Mayor, that you shared with me earlier today. The Monday morning outlook. Janie, I hope you've got that. And really, I'm going to send it to all of you council members, but I wanted to point out the highlighted areas. And again, the mayor's already seen these 4 highlights. It looks like some rough going ahead of us. And we've taken a very conservative approach to the budget. Again, no increases in the tax rates, no use of the fund balance. We've got a little bit of a deficit hanging out there that you'll see shortly. We've kept the schools almost 100% whole. So we've really, I think, responded to the challenge very well, but we are going to have to wait and see what else evolves in the next 2, 4 to 6 months. It could be rough financially for all of us in the country and here in Lexington. So Jake, are you ready to take it away unless council has questions on this document?
Sure, Jim, I'm ready.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
All right, Janie, if you could put up the budget scenarios sheet for me, please. All right, thank you. Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I just want to start off and kind of summarize these scenarios a little bit for you. I know you've probably seen a few different versions that have been sent your way. This has been almost a daily evolving process. We're constantly looking at the budget on a daily basis, getting the latest numbers, finding the latest cuts where we can, anticipating the latest revenue projections. So this has been many, many different versions over. And I think tonight we have a good recommendation for proposal. But I'd just like to walk through kind of what the thought process was behind these scenarios. If you may recall, at our last work session, we were looking at about a roughly 5% expense cut in the first proposed budget, from the first proposed budget that you had seen, with anticipated revenue reductions of a little over 900,000. Here you can see in scenario 1, and I'll touch on the other 2 scenarios. Scenario 1 is what we are targeting right now as what is most likely and what we would like to put forth for consideration of adoption. As you can see on total revenue reductions, we have more than doubled the anticipated revenue drop from our last work session. We're over $2 million in anticipated revenue shortfall in this scenario. So that's roughly a 10.5% expense cut from the budget book. And kind of what we did with this, we kept the same distribution of reduced local revenues as the Virginia First Cities study. However, we increased each of those categories proportionally. So significant increase in sales tax, meals and lodging, BPOL, and real estate and personal property. We did leave at 2.5%. We're currently not anticipating much of a drop off in those taxes at this time. We additionally accounted for reduced state revenues, which we had not done previously. And thank you to Gary for putting together a state revenue reduction projection that I believe was shared with you all previously. This reflects roughly 10% of total state revenues being decreased across the board. Additionally, you'll see some other specific revenue reductions that we have identified so far in this process. And now, Janie, if you could start scrolling down just a little bit into expenses. Most of
Hey,
the
can I ask one question on the revenues, on the reduced arts grant? Is that, I know that's the Lime Kiln Fair. Is that for reduced to both of them or one of them?
that's reduced for both the fair and Lime Kiln grant. Yes. Yeah, and if you could stop right there just momentarily. Most of these have not changed appreciably, but a few that I just wanted to point out. We have completely eliminated the proposed wage increase in this iteration of the budget. I will also point out the school fund. As of late, I know Tommy, our assistant finance director, been working closely with the schools in the last several weeks. They additionally, in their budget, have factored in revenue losses and decreased revenues from the state and worked to cut their budget accordingly. Through their efforts, they were at last finally left with a roughly $38,000 shortfall. So that's something that we have taken into consideration to be able to cover from the general fund in this budget scenario. If you can continue scrolling on down, Janie, please.
Quick question on that.
Sure.
So 416, we had a other wage and benefit change of just over $71,000, and that expense has been cut to about 40,000.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Let me comment on that, Chuck. We've had so many iterations of this, it's hard to keep track of what's in which component. And we were one time reducing it to 2% pay increase for half a year, and then we were doing a bonus. So quite honestly, that 71,000, whatever number that we looked at previously, was probably inaccurately calculated. So Jake and I have spent a lot of effort to tie these back to the exact budget numbers. So we've tried to get this where it's a little bit more clear. For example, the police chief vacancy, at one point we had originally assumed 2-month vacancy, and then we increased that to 6 months, and now it's full year. So rather than having a little bit here and a little bit there, we tried to get those more just on one line. So that's why that number has changed, Chuck.
Thank you. Janie, if you could continue scrolling down to the recommended section. Yes, thank you. So as you can see, the above expense cuts, most of them you've previously seen, and those are mostly departmental cuts and outside agency, regional agency contribution numbers that have changed as we've modified the budget. The colored items that you see here are expense reduction options that we have come up with to help us bridge the deficit that we have between revenue and expenses. Some of these that we previously discussed, keeping the police chief vacant, we've continued to add that in as well. We've also currently added the elimination of recycling collection, and this is elimination of the service only. So no positions would actually be eliminated from this. The net savings are the 2 individuals assigned to that service will be reassigned to other vacancies that are currently in the Public Works Department. And the figure you see there is the net savings from eliminating the collection service. We've also reduced the expense to maintain the outdoor swimming pool. We can't eliminate it entirely as we've looked at it. There are some expenses that it just would not make any sense to cut and would probably cost us more money in the long term to do so. So we've modified that and been able to cut what we can from maintaining the swimming pool while it's not in service and not operational this season. We've also eliminated discretionary agency funding and including the fine arts and lime kiln funding. We've continued to plan on eliminating the SRO position. That is the local share plus the anticipated grant funding in the 59,000 figure you see. We've also been able to find some savings in park maintenance. The vast majority of park maintenance is in wages and from mowing the fields and the parks and keeping them up and going. But we have found some room in reduced water from not watering, not putting down mulch, seeding, et cetera, that we can cut from parks. We did keep in the concept of possible staff furloughs if revenue projections did worsen, that could be possibly thrown in at a later date. We don't have a number on that, but it is an option on the table to consider. The 2 items below that, we have come up with some ways to reduce the contribution to the capital projects fund. The $55,000 figure you see there is from eliminating downtown improvements for fiscal year 2023 and playground and parks upgrades for fiscal years 2023 and 2025. We thought that these were appropriate cuts that we could make without causing too much disruption to capital projects And we were able to stagger them in a way that, 1 year they would receive funding, the next year they wouldn't, to make up the difference from not receiving funding in certain years.
Jake, if I may, we need to point out that that $55,000 reduction is in addition to the reduction that we looked at the last work session, which is further up the spreadsheet.
Yes, thank you, Gary. And that this is on top of the other CIP projects that we had already cut from the budget previously. Additionally, we're recommending decreasing the equipment replacement fund transfer by half in the $300,000 figure you see there. In doing this, it's going to be very critical several months into FY21 and beyond to evaluate our equipment and our fleet to find ways that we could possibly either extend the useful life of our fleet or eliminate vehicles and equipment entirely. When you make a reduction to this contribution, it's not just impacting the next year, but subsequent equipment purchases for years down the road. So this is one thing that we'll have to keep an eye on closely. If revenue projections are better than anticipated, it's certainly something that we could add back into the budget. But this will be a constant evaluation, I anticipate, as we get into FY21. So the bottom line, as you can see here, the total expense cuts we have are a little over $1.7 million. Again, with revenue reduction of a little over $2 million. So we have a deficit right now of $292,494. Jane, if you could scroll down to other options. Thank you. That's good. As you can see at the bottom, under the category Other, if we utilize our current projected FY 2020 surplus carryover, which we've estimated to be $282,000, we can nearly cover that entire deficit, all but about $10,000. So at that point, at this point, we feel pretty confident, Jim and I in discussions, that we can find $10,000 worth of additional cuts somewhere in the budget. We can get to that number, but it looks like in scenario one, we are going to be able to fully cover the deficit that we're projecting from the loss of revenues. As you can see, we have some other options on the table that we're not recommending at this time. And as you can see, some of these are getting into services and into personnel. So these are not things we take lightly, but we have put these options on the table if the situation worsens and revenue projections are worse than anticipated.
Can we skip back for just a sec?
Sure.
I'm trying to figure out what the difference is between the document that was revised 428 that had a deficit of 283,728 and how we got to 292,494 deficit.
Again, I'd have to go back and look at the exact documents, but these anticipated revenue reductions have stayed the same. Anticipated expenses
Right.
constantly added and subtract and had to revise certain expense cuts. We originally had anticipated, for instance, with reducing the swimming pool expense, the entire amount. Subsequently found out that we can't, it's not really feasible to do that. So that's just been a process of further evaluation. and
Okay,
refinement.
it's only $10,000. I'll check the document later.
Okay.
There's a number of things that happen. I'm not sure I can rattle all of them off the top of my head. It appears that there may be a vacancy in RARO, and so we've made the assumption that their board may decide to keep that position vacant for 6 months. That saved each locality a little bit of money, not a whole lot for Lexington, but a little bit. I think the iteration that you're talking about, Chuck, we were thinking about actually eliminating public works position for the second half of the year in community support activities. That'd be things like putting up the Christmas decorations, holiday flags, that sort of thing. This current version puts that service back in, but in lieu of that, we've taken out some non-salary expenses in parks, basically irrigation cost and some renovation, reseeding of the fields, that sort of thing. Let's see, another thing that changed as recently as this morning, we got the new numbers from the schools. So we had to put in extra, I think $38,000 funding of that. There's probably some other things that have changed that just aren't coming to the top of my head right now. But like Jake said to start with, this has been a moving target and a
Yeah.
fast moving target at that.
Okay, I didn't know if it was just something obvious or just shaving here and there, but that's not important right now.
So again, this scenario one is what we're working with, what we're bringing forward for possible adoption. I will share with you the other two scenarios just briefly. And, again, we're not recommending these at this time, but we do have it in the back of our minds and wanted to see what the difference would be with increased reductions. So scenario two here, I'll just briefly touch upon. This incorporates a larger local tax revenue reduction. So as you can see, we've increased sales tax to 35%, 50% for meals, lodging, and BPOL, and doubled the anticipated reduction in real estate and personal property tax to 5%. And Jane, if we could scroll on to scenario three, again, none of the expenses have changed. And briefly, you could see there, just scroll past it, but the anticipated deficit in this scenario is obviously much larger at about $550,000. Again, we do have total options to cover that, but however, we're not considering this scenario as likely at this time. Again, to scenario three, this is our worst case scenario by far. This is a 15% overall revenue reduction. We decided not to try to pick and choose various taxes that would decrease, but just anticipate 15% across the board of all revenues. This is almost $3 million, so very drastic revenue reduction. And Jane, if you could go to the bottom of the next page, the projected deficit here. Is just a little over 800,000. So again, this is a worst case scenario. We do have options to cover a large bit of that, but again, not anticipating this at this time. So at this point, I'll kind of pause and see if there are any further questions on the scenarios before I move on to a budget summary.
When will we find out how our year-to-date tax collections in all these categories compare for, I guess, March, April, May, and I guess June? When do we find out how those year-to-dates of 2020 compared to 19, so we can get, I guess, a more realistic idea of where our horizon is?
Yeah, good question, Chuck. Our sales tax, again, is on a 2-month lag. So at the end of this month, we should have a good indication for the first part of the effects of COVID from March. Additionally, our lodging and meals taxes have a 1-month lag. So we've already seen a little bit of March. Obviously, there's been a drop off, but honestly, not quite as bad as initially we had thought. I think before we really draw any major conclusions on that, I'd like to take a look at what April looks like. So at the end of May, we should have a pretty good understanding of the effects of COVID on our tax collections and possibly be able to make a projection moving forward from 2 months of data.
I should know, when did the students leave town?
I'm not sure exactly. Jim, do you have information on when exactly the schools made the decision?
When they left town? Well, I know VMI was on their spring break. I think that was just over a month ago for them.
Okay.
I don't recall exactly, and WNL was about the same time span. Of course, they were back, I believe, or they were here.
Didn't this all happen about at least by the end of March?
Oh,
I was thinking mid-March.
exactly. Second to third week of March is what I was.
VMI didn't come back on March 22nd. That's when they would have come back essentially, and they did not come back. And just to talking about the lodging tax, I mean, I think, you know, we think we might know something more in a month or so, but it's all dependent on if there are events occurring in Lexington that will draw people to those hotels. And we know there haven't been any events. And so we don't want to use a crystal ball. We can't look into the future, but we can just surmise if an FY21 events will continue to be held in Lexington that bring people to our hotel rooms. I mean, April, May within the city, those were always months of 100% occupancy essentially for every weekend. You know, as we look down south, Roanoke's projecting 70% decline in their lodging tax next year, 70%. So, you know, let's hope that it's only 40%.
Well, and what you were asking Chuck as well about how many months until, it's a moving target. May, June, July, August, September, when we're looking back a month or two and seeing how we're performing vis-a-vis last year and the projections that we've made. So I don't believe we're going to be able to have certainty in July or August what things are going to look like 3 months from then. Again, it's just a moving target. It's a process. It'll depend a lot on not only VMI and WNL, but also consumer confidence. Will people travel? You know, is there a resurgence again, a second resurgence of the disease that impacts how people react? We just don't know.
Well, I think once we have those numbers in place, it'll give us a much more accurate picture of what the first 2 quarters of 2021 are going to look like. And that, I guess that's what I'm trying to illustrate. Of course, that depends on whether, as you said, VMI and WNL start back up again.
I think it all depends if those 2 institutions, they may open up, but if they hold a normal parents' weekend, if they hold a normal homecoming, if they hold home football games and have fans at them, then we have a good idea that people will drive and hopefully stay in hotel rooms. But if they don't invite those folks to come to their campuses, then the hotel rooms, we know what'll happen. So
I am confident that seeing the messaging from Virginia Tech and Radford and Lynchburg and UNC, that's a strong signal from where I'm sitting that once we get closer to the fall, we're going to see a much greater deal of what was normal, and it I guess it'd be sort of a peculiar double standard if they have students back on campus, but then don't have large events that would kind of expose all attendees to the same risk. So my 2 cents.
Do members of the council have any questions on the budget scenarios, specifically number 1, scenario 1, with the 10.5% cut?
Yeah, I do. So 2 things. As far as the recommended options, like the only couple that I have some concerns about are totally eliminating the discretionary agency funding. And I'm not clear on, it says eliminate indoor pool contribution, but there's nothing there. I thought we had, along with the other agencies, had sent them a letter and said that they would get 90% of what they normally would have got. My concern is that for us, it's 44,450, but for them, that's a big chunk in their budget. And it's also, I feel like we need to be in lockstep with what Buena Vista and Rockbridge County is doing, our regional partners with some of these agencies. Like it's not really, if they're committed to supporting these agencies, I'm a little concerned about not doing that. And Anyway, that's my concern. That's the only concern about the recommended options for me. I don't know how other city council members feel about that.
I agree. I think those are good points, and I'd like to see specifically what those are, because like in our budget book, I think they're mixed into 3 different sections, so I'm not quite clear exactly what makes that up, but I think it's also a good point Dennis made to make sure that we're following suit with the other localities.
And like I said, I totally understand, next year, if we get to next year and we're facing a disaster, I understand saying to the outside agencies, hey, we can't fund you, but I feel like now is the worst time to pull the rug out from under these organizations. So if there's some way to preserve that, I would feel a lot better about this budget. But I mean, I'm really impressed with all the work that you and Jake and Gary did. I mean, I think this is great what you've done. That particular thing I'm a little concerned about.
I think those are good points and incredible work by staff to really do what a lot of us asked between the last work session and meetings and today. When it comes to, the functions of the city and the cuts that we're making in City Hall, and to the fire department and to the police department, and to potentially pushing burdens onto future budget cycles, if you will. If I were to reinstate funding to any of these agencies, I would respectfully want to know if they accessed PPP funds, if they did, because we're obviously providing the rest of our contribution for the current fiscal year, and we would just be eliminating it for the next fiscal year. And I would also point out and just share, I agree it's often very important to be in lockstep in our regional partners. However, I would point out that they are each raising taxes and dipping into fund balance. And I am reluctant to raise taxes in the city. We could raise taxes 1 penny on the real estate rate, and that would yield about $53,000. And then we could fund the outside agencies and some of them. So but I feel like we have cut to the bone our city employees, and I am reluctant to ask any more of the police department, the fire department, City Hall, Public Works. That's just my 2 cents.
On the other options below that, the discretionary non-essential, where it has the decrease in the city council budget, are those recommended and they're included in there?
No, those are not currently included in the scenario for bridging the deficit. Those are just potential option on the table.
Okay, that's what I thought. And what does the decreasing city council budget, what's that include?
I believe that would include salaries as well as basically anything non-essential to the function of government, anything that we can't do without
Conferences.
conferences, memberships, training, et cetera, things that are vital.
I'd like to make a point that Jake made earlier, is as we see the year progress, whether it's September, October, December, if things are going well, we can refund or put those agencies back in the budget. However, if we fund them today and things go worse next fall, we've spent the money on those agencies and we can't get it back. And that's my concern right there. So I think we need to take more of a wait and see approach on many of these issues. Hope that we have a little bit more of an optimistic scenario develop between now and the end of 2020, the calendar year. But if not, again, let's be a little conservative and wait and see. We might have to dig into fund balance.
Can I ask on those agency amounts, does that include the $12,000 we give to the Rockbridge Area Housing Corporation?
It does, I believe.
Okay, so that's a big chunk of it, actually. Most of those other amounts are very small.
They're 2 to 4,000 somewhere, maybe 5,000, 8 or 10 cuts of that nature,
Okay,
my recollection.
yes.
They're inclusive of the arts grant as well. So we typically would donate 4,000 to Lime Kiln and they'd get a match.
Yeah, that's actually a separate line item right below, but yeah, it is listed.
Yes, that's correct. And we pulled that out separately just because I know we'd had some discussion in the past on not potentially affecting that funding due to the state grant match, but just wanted to add that, but keep it separate from the rest.
Sorry about that.
I have a question related to RARO. If we could go back up, I just want to see what was the recommended cut. You don't have a percentage next to that, so I was just curious what the percentage is. And is that taken into account that there's nothing going on in the summer?
This cut right here is budget cuts that they were previously able to identify, plus the 6 months vacancy of a position in RARO. The total funding now, total contribution now for RARO is approximately $71,000.
As far as the programs that were cut or the expenses that could be cut from RARO, I did speak with the director several weeks ago, and he said just maintaining the parks and keeping things the way they are was necessary for them to keep most of the expenses at the levels they're currently operating under. Now, I would, maybe dispute that. You could mow lawn a little cheaper, or we could find another way of getting it done, but that was their position at that time. Of course, since then, with the director resigning, we do have a few more dollars of savings there.
Right, and so I didn't want to bring that up because I wasn't sure if that was, okay, so the $10,280 right now, that does not include or take into consideration the executive director's position being vacant. Is that correct?
No,
It does include that being vacant for 6 months in addition to the other cuts that had been previously identified.
Okay. Okay, so it does include 6 months vacancy for that position. Okay.
I think it would also, we should note that that's not something that the city can make the unilateral decision on. That'll be up to the board of RARO.
Okay.
I believe it would be a correct statement that this is going to be a position that's supported by the county as well as the city. Correct, Jim?
I know that as of this morning, when I was communicating with Spencer, he thought that was probably a position they could support. That was, no reason to fill the position at this juncture.
Hey,
But
Jim,
it is a separate board.
Jim, going back to the topic of agencies, do I recall accurately that Buena Vista is eliminating all discretionary contributions?
I believe that's the case, yes. In some of the agencies, like I think it was the library, they're cutting even more funding. They're like a quarter of their percentage funding cut to the library, and a few other agencies, they treat it similarly. I think the chamber as well, perhaps, is completely gone. All their discretionary agencies are gone.
Right. So Dennis, where you were mentioning being in lockstep with our regional partners, Buena Vista's already said we're not funding anything.
It's my understanding too that Rockbridge County will be cutting some agencies because Spencer Suter has been reaching out to some asking for cuts.
Well, Jake or Jim, maybe you can help me, or Gary. The eliminate indoor pool contribution, there's no figure attached to that. I mean, I know that the city and the county have an agreement to make a contribution to the indoor pool and in fact, my understanding is that the county is committed to the 13.5, which the city previously said they would contribute to the indoor pool this year. So if in fact the city pulls out and the county pulls out, I mean,
It's included in there, though. We are.
Yeah, and this scenario one, there is, at one point, we took out 10%, then in another iteration, we took out the entire 15,000 contribution, but this version actually has the indoor pool funded at the 15,000.
okay, I mean, I think that they understood that they were going to be treated like the other discretionary agencies, and we're looking for the 13.5, not the 15. So, there's that at least. And I'm pretty sure that the county is contributing 13.5 to them. So but it is important to them because they do plan on opening as soon as the governor allows it. They can do social distancing with the lanes, so they can, have their members sign up for, to reserve a lane for an hour. So they are planning on opening as soon as possible. But I mean, beyond them, I would also say the same for the other, the discretionary agencies. I mean, I feel like if there's ever a time to contribute to Rockbridge Area Health Center or the Y, or, I feel like now is the time to take up that slack. That's what we have a reserve fund for. I mean, we are in a pretty dire emergency, and this is a time when these agencies cannot do, their typical fundraising. So they really are in a difficult position. So again, I would, for the discretionary agencies, I would strongly lobby to try to save that. If it makes more sense to make the payouts on a quarterly basis, so that way, we can have a better sense of the fall and the winter, et cetera. But, I have to speak out for them.
But well, I guess in responding to that, would it be unreasonable to, go back around to the agencies and ask them what can you live with, or what can you live without? Because we're all in the same, dealing with all the same stuff. Like as David has pointed out, Limekiln, I'm sure can easily absorb, but they're cut. But when you go down the list, what would be a reasonable cut for them to live with
Right.
from their response? So Yellow Brick Road, I guess we have budgeted for $1,000. What if Jim said to them, we just, what can you live with? Can you live with a 100% cut? Can you live with a 50% cut? Can you live with no cut? I think that's a reasonable approach, because I think those agencies, some are more able to absorb more reductions.
I'm concerned that I'm under the impression that our city manager and finance director, we've done multiple rounds of asking our city department heads to look again at their budget, and then look again at their budget. And then, can you cut a little bit more from your budget? And so we've gone to Chief Dickerson, Captain Riley, and so on, Jeff Martone, and we've asked so much of them to cut. And I'm not sure I hear anyone asking to reinstate funding to our own city departments. And so should we before we before we go out to outside businesses that may have received money from the payment protection plan and they can fundraise. Actually, the fact of the matter is they can fundraise, but our police department cannot fundraise, or the fire department can't fundraise. They don't. So I don't know if folks are looking at spending more money beyond what is being proposed to us. are there places where we've cut really close to the bone city services that might impact city in any respect? So I only throw that out there.
I will say, I proposed it originally to look at it, and I agree with what Jim had said. Keep it in, and when we're going to evaluate this monthly and make adjustments like we do now, but there'll probably be more severe adjustments than we typically do when we do a quarterly budget amendment. And things improve, we can put the money back in. But I would like to fund them. It's roughly, without the housing association, we're talking $32,000. It's small amounts to each of these agencies. And if you remember, they all applied specifically for a specific project, which a lot of those projects probably aren't being done. I don't know that Jim has the time to go back to all those agencies and check on the status of those projects. So I agree with the proposal that Jim's made.
I do too, because I think what we also, to make budget scenario 1 work, it shouldn't be lost on any taxpayers or us. I know it isn't lost on us, but that we are essentially taking from future years of the budget when we should be putting forth, $606,000 into equipment replacement fund, and we're only putting 303. We'll pay for that in future years. Same with capital projects fund transfers. So if we have the money, we should probably be funding future years, not borrowing almost from future years. And God knows something that's important to us, that there continues to be nothing in the budget for Jordan's Point Park. And if I were to be opening up, if I were to find $30,000 for agencies or something right now in this razor thin budget, maybe we should be looking forward to Jordan's Point Park. And I don't think we can do that right now, given this budget. So I am just so appreciative of the work that Jake and Gary, Jim, our department heads, because I know they've put in a ton of work on this and they've done exactly what we've asked. And
this isn't a matter of being not appreciated of Jim and Jake. They've done a great job. They presented us options. I'm just saying that from my perspective, that's cutting too deep on agencies that really rely on those funds. And we've already sent these agencies letters saying that they would get 90% of their requests. So that is my, anyway, I won't say any more about it, but that's my concern about it. I feel like, all right, I won't say any more about it, but.
Dennis, I want to assure you that we hear your concern and all of your concerns. I would say at the end of the first quarter of next year, we take a good hard look at where we are. We can, if things are going well, within a quarter or the second quarter of the fiscal year next year, we can put back in the majority of those that funding if things are going well.
Okay.
But I don't want to put them in a position of saying that funding is coming and it's not, and we find out things are worse, and then what? I mean, I hope they're not worse. I don't want to be negative, but there are implications and indications that, the economy is going to struggle for some time.
Okay.
When we started this meeting, I mentioned, typically we find a hole, say a 500,000, and then we fill it. With this, we just have absolutely no idea. And the professionals, our staff coming up with the scenarios for us to consider, that almost $3 million just sends chills down my spine. At that point, and continuing, we're all in this together. So where we get and where we end up in 2021 is more of a crapshoot than ever. But I think for Chuck and Marilyn, this may be like deja vu all over again from agency discussions. Nobody wants to cut them. I'd love to double what we're giving them because they do great work. However, it's not necessarily the core function of government. And none of them, I don't think, are relying, their operations are not dependent upon our contributions. So I offer that from a perspective standpoint. And as someone pointed out, I don't know who to give credit, could raise taxes a penny to fund all those agencies. You could steal from the fund balance if we choose to as the year progresses. If Yellow Brick Road is going out of business because we haven't made our $1,000 contribution, we can steal from the fund balance and fund that. When we look at the contribution to Mountain View, people's roof over their head and subsidized housing. Housing is critical. Childcare is critical. So many of these things are so very important and so significant. They're really, really difficult decisions. If they were easy, we would have been done a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And counting, looking forward to sunny days, as it were. But I greatly respect and appreciate you raising the issue of looking out for these agencies, in particular nonprofits, because they do play a vital role in our community. And I'm hopeful that with things like the Community Foundation and the COVID fund that they've started, that's a resource for all of these to replace in the coming year lots of things that we're doing.
Well, I wish that I could contribute to the conversation about this, but I'm having to recuse myself because I'm associated with one that you're discussing. So carry on.
Enough said. Marilyn, any other questions on other parts of the budget or thoughts from your perspective?
I don't really have any qualms about much of this. I mean, it's all very discouraging, but it's something that we have to do, and we have to make it happen. I like a little bit of the idea of looking at it maybe on a quarterly basis to see where we are. But I don't know how you make promises to people and then you take it away.
Bad policy.
Yeah.
I agree. No doubt. And more than ever in 2021, we're going to be watching to see if as the revenue comes in.
Right. I mean, it could improve or it could get worse. We just don't know. So we have to look at probably the worst case scenario and adjust to that.
Right. Other members of council have any questions? Any of our other attendees have any questions? I'll open the floor if you have any questions or comments. See Doug's smiling face, but I don't know if you wish to address council. Not a chance. Very good. Very good. So, Jim, you're looking to get guidance from council, looking at scenario 1, working towards a consensus for Thursday. So
Yes, sir.
Certainly folks have an opportunity to change their mind, but is there anyone who has an objection for moving forward and bringing forward for consideration on Thursday, scenario 1? Not to say you don't have angst about it, but any objection to bringing this forward? I see lots of microphones on mute, so I'm anticipating you're saying nothing as well. But Jake, Gary, anything else you all want to add or observations from your seats?
Yes, well, just briefly, again, as Jim said, I envision that we're going to have to revisit the budget somewhat frequently as this situation evolves. I mean, this is a total shot in the dark right now. And, this is an exercise, it's an attempt for us to kind of project what worst case scenarios could be, what the revenue losses could be, and have a plan to address them. And again, if situation improves and, some of these cuts can be added back in by all means, I think that's something we can absolutely do and periodically monitor as we get into FY21. And again, just to close out my discussion on the budget, Janie, if you could go to the budget summaries page. Yes, and the all fund summary, if you could scroll down kind of to the bottom to see our bottom line. So the bottom line, I just want to point this out because it's somewhat confusing, and I know Jim and I had a discussion on it. On the budget summary sheets that you see here, the general fund deficiency deficit is 172.71. You may be asking, well, I saw 292 on the budget scenario. If you recall, in the original proposed budget book, the number in the general fund at the bottom line was approximately $120,000. That represents a balanced budget for the general fund due to the debt obligation that is owed from the utility fund to the general fund. It's not, in talking to Gary, it's not historically been accounted for as an expense and a receivable over in the general fund, so it shows up as a fund transfer. So the 292 figure brings the deficit to zero and then gets us back to $120,000 showing on the bottom line on the general fund. So just wanted to point that out, as it could be confusing when you're seeing two different shortfall numbers thrown around. Again, just some final points. The 52,000 that you see in the school budget, we have made them whole operationally through the general fund. The 52,000 is for a planned capital contribution for roof repair at the high school for FY21. The utility fund has been adjusted. The amount of budgeted water to be purchased from MSA has been budgeted downward due to rectifying a water leak issue at VMI. So we have adjusted these figures accordingly with an offset in anticipated wastewater treatment as well. For our equipment replacement fund, you can see the impact of reducing it by half. And additionally, in our capital projects fund, we have reduced that by $55,000. Again, those are for future years where we thought we could make some cuts. So just in summation, this is where we stand right now. And this is the impact of scenario one and what we would like to move forward with for proposed budget on Thursday.
If I can clarify one thing, I know everyone probably at this meeting realizes this, but I think it's important to point out that this budget, should we approve it on Thursday, does it end recycling in Lexington? Meaning no more separating glass, no more cardboard pickup, no more using the bins. I just want to point that out, clarify that.
Yes, that is correct. That the recycling collection service would be eliminated in its entirety.
Thank you.
Yeah, because from the study that we were shown, it is not cost feasible to even put a collection place at Public Works. But people should not get rid of their bins because we will bring it back.
How does the eliminating recycling affect our obligation to recycle per DEQ? Because anywhere in those documents, I couldn't find any enforcement penalties if localities don't recycle. So I guess that's two questions bundled into one.
Yeah, Chuck, and that's a good question and something I raised when the idea of eliminating recycling first was thrown around. By law, all localities in Virginia must require a minimum 25% recycle rate. However, we qualify for a reduced recycle rate due to our population density. It's a 15% regional rate for the solid waste planning unit, which includes Lexington, Buena Vista, and the county. I know previously in my time with BRRA, that's something that we had looked at, I've researched. There are some potential modifications to the regional solid waste management plan that may come from failure to meet that rate, but I could not identify any specific penalties or fines as a result of not meeting that minimum 15%. And additionally, this is something Gary and I have discussed. I imagine a lot of localities are in a similar boat right now with recycling. So this isn't something that's going to be unique to us. I don't believe there'll be a lot of localities that are looking at reducing or eliminating recycling.
Well, that's helpful to know that our obligation's only 15% instead of 25. I guess because of the city's density, I presumed it was at 25, but that's helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
Excellent points. Gary, anything for the good of the cause?
No, I think that all the important points have been hit. I would emphasize, however, the importance of monitoring actual performance throughout the year, and especially how the revenues are coming in. Because I share both Jim and Jake's sense that you're probably going to have several other points in time throughout the fall and next winter that you may have to revisit the budget depending on how state revenues are coming in, local revenues. I wish that I could say you'd have the luxury of adopting this budget and then forget about the budget for another year. I'm afraid that's not going to be the case.
Are we planning on communicating with the discretionary agencies that we're looking at 100% funding cuts? And if that's the case, if we get a response of, and this is to Dennis's point, if they respond, if we don't get your money, we're shutting down. We just can't afford to lose it. What is our position in that case?
Well, first question, I will definitely communicate to the agencies that based on the best data we have and information we currently have, we just cannot put them in the FY21 fiscal year budget. That we'll review the budget and our revenue sources and the economy next fall and through the winter to see if potentially there's room for extending some funding. And then I can also ask if how this will affect their financial position and their future operations here in the community, and see what I get back in response and let you know.
Okay, I'm just looking to be prepared for something awkward or uncomfortable.
Sure.
Certainly not a decision that any of us really embrace. But I think Marilyn may have said it best, which we don't want to make commitments that we can't honor. And we'll certainly know more in 6 months. Who would have guessed 90 days ago when the Virginia legislature was fighting over how to spend a $300 million surplus, that we'd find ourselves streets closed, so to speak, and businesses shut, and who knew what PPP was all about? Wild, fast-moving times. Jake or members of council have anything else? Jake, a terrific job presenting, and it's reflective of the terrific job that Gary has done training you up, because I know you knew nothing when you arrived and you were so raw, but the master is doing a good job. So both of you keep up the good work, and all of your efforts make Jim look even better. So
Thank you. Yes.
there's nothing else to come before council this evening. One last opportunity. Again, I'll remind scenario one will come forward with everything it has to offer. We'll have an opportunity to have additional discussion and work towards adoption of the budget on Thursday. So thank you all very much. Have a great evening, and we will stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yep. Thank you. Good night, all.